Hi, hello. We are back with the next set of 10 albums in my top 50 of the decade, starting with number 40, Kil Moon's Benji. I felt like I rhymed there, incidentally. This is the beginning of kind of a new era in Kil Moon's career. It's the blurry picture plus entries in his diary era. It's much more expansive, though, than later albums in this mode. It looks kind of back at the whole of his life, and it connects a lot of incidents and kind of patterns together. It's less about, this is what I did today, this is what I did the next day, this is what I ate, and more thinking, what were all the times I felt love as a child? What are all my memories around people that died too young? And there's big dynamic contrasts between some of these shorter, focused narratives and big, sprawling panoramas of memory. Ones where he's just kind of connecting idea to idea to idea, and other ones where he seems to be just kind of in a mood, and anything that comes to mind in that mood is suitable to sing about. The former are quite succinctly structured. There's actually song-like. They're even kind of catchy. This is something that disappears at some point in this stage of his career as things become more and more like the diary entries. But the beautiful, wistful guitar melodies in these latter types of strong songs, they just stretch you out across this vast expanse of time and place. Huge regions of his emotional memory being carried along by these beautiful looping guitar melodies, but these subtle developments in them. When he kind of brings you to the climax of a story, or seems to remember as he's singing some additional detail that really stood out to him, that might have actually motivated the original reminiscing in the first place. It feels like a kind of a crystallized memory, and they're so beautiful that it's almost painful that when you encounter them so deep in this landscape of memory, that you see so much represented just within it, that it's almost too much to bear. It's like eating old cheese and biting into one of those nodules of crystallized cheese. I feel like this album is so honest, so unpretentious. It's just him. It's just his real life, his real feelings, and his guitar. There's something so simple, so beautiful about that. My recommended tracks are I Watched the Film, The Song Remains the Same, which is quite representative of, I think, the kind of diary-like attitude that a lot of his songwriting in this era reflects. Just a really, really beautiful kind of looping, haunting guitar melody as he starts thinking about his own musical career and all of the incidental connections he made along the way, and how he has to go and thank some people now that he's really appreciating how much they had done for him. And Micheline, which has kind of like a more song-like structure, that it's got this one sort of central musical phrase, which is kind of nice and catchy. But the kind of depth of memory he gets into, thinking first about his friend Micheline, and then his grandmother, and then not just his grandmother herself, but the summers he spent near his grandmother's place. And deep within this, when this piano is introduced, it's that real kind of crystallization of memory, and it's there that he talks about seeing the movie Benji for the first time, the incident that motivates the title of this album. And oh man, even thinking about it now, I feel almost moved to tears, so we gotta move on. Next we have this, Kids See Ghosts, the self-titled Kids See Ghosts album by Kanye and Kid Cudi. This is a real kaleidoscope of really psychedelic hip-hop music. It's Kanye's production at a super maximal, dense level, the most maximal and dense he's had since My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. But unlike that album, which was very fractal, which told many different stories and had many different emotional moods, this has like a very beautiful, very singular vision at its heart. It's some of the most just kind of straight up overwhelmingly beautiful music I think Kanye has ever composed, which is saying a lot. Like, I am a huge Kanye fan. But yeah, sometimes on this album, he just goes for sheer beauty and absolutely nails it. Kid Cudi's presence is quite convincing, I guess I would say. It feels like, even though I've never really been into Kid Cudi, you know, there's a few tracks that I thought were catchy, but I never really felt deeply for him. But I knew that he always had this super devoted fan base, people who love Kid Cudi more than any other artist, who feel so emotional about so many of his tracks. It feels like this just gives me a cheat code to jump straight to that level. That really kind of iconic Cudi things, like the sound of his voice, that signature, they really resonate with me. It feels like I have been listening to him all the way since high school or whatever, with how deep and meaningful those things seem. There's no filter. There's nothing that feels like it's for the sake of itself. Everything is contributing to this kind of central thesis that they're trying to express. And it's not just in terms of like good sound. It's not just that they put effort into everything, but there's something bold and new with every idea that you encounter on this album. And it's not just in terms of the general meaning, but as I said, everything is contributing to this core thesis. Everything feels like it's trying to prove this singular vision. And what is that vision? Times were hard. You know, both of them had been struggling with a lot of mental health issues, with some ups and downs in their careers, with some maybe negative media attention. But they're back. They're back. They're together. They're free. They don't feel burdened or weighed down by all of that suffering. But that life is good. And they prove it. That this redemption that they're feeling, this sense that they're capable of everything again, is right there in the music itself. The music itself is a joyful celebration of the very creative energy that led to its existence. Isn't that wonderful? I think stuff like that is so wonderful. We'll encounter a few more albums that I kind of describe this way. My recommended tracks are Fourth Dimension, which is kind of a Kanye classic in the way that it cuts back with like super old samples and stuff, mixed in a really interesting way, and then some awesome bombastic verses, and then Cudi montage, which is all based around a sample from Kurt Cobain's Montage of Heck. I think that's what it's called. Maybe it's actually called Montage of Hell. Montage of Heck sounds so silly now that I'm saying it out loud. But yeah, it was like an acoustic album that he had just recorded privately, that had a lot of like unfinished songs and raw takes and stuff. And something about this song too has that same kind of rawness, that it just kind of explodes out of one idea. And yet both Kanye and Cudi are so passionate on it. It feels so definitive, and oh my god, the ending of it is just indescribably beautiful when they get the Hudson Mohawk going and the just that swirling kaleidoscopic feeling. Oh my god, oh, it's so good. I just want to listen to it right now. But we got to move on. Our next album is Teyana Taylor's KTSE, Keep That Same Energy. This is another Kanye-produced mini-album from 2018, just as Kids See Ghost. He put out 5, and they all got varying levels of attention and critical response and stuff. But this one I felt was very, very underappreciated. I think it's secretly the strongest of all 5 of them, even though it didn't get the same level of attention necessarily. It's a spotlight that's shone on the secret boss of the Good Music label, and we kind of follow her through both a day in her life and her life as a whole. And you might not know who Teyana Taylor is, and you might not know what she does, but as she says herself, what do? I do everything. And you surely believe it. We have an arc from these bold proclamations of herself, defining herself as an artist, seemingly wanting to start beef in some ways with some people that she's above naming. But then we also dive into the deepest intimacies of her life, taking a look at her and her lover, and taking a look at kind of the images that are most inspiring to her, that kind of build her fundamentally as a person. And from there, there's these reflections on her greater aspirations, the motivations of her life, like where she's going to go from here, this sense of looking forward into infinite possibilities. And then there's this really surreally explosive finale. The final track, I can't explain it. It's so weirdly juxtaposed with everything else that's happening. But it's a banger for sure. It feels like it's a kind of a novella centered around her character, that sketches a day into kind of the intimate night, into those vast, far-reaching thoughts you have lying in the quiet bedroom, into the surreal, the dream, the comically exaggerated, the explosive possibilities of the future. The sense of the universal, these kind of archetypical experiences that we can all relate to, blending into the most personal and intimate and uniquely you. I love it. I love it. As I said, the sort of thing I love. Dare I say it's Joycean? It does really feel kind of Ulysses-esque in the way these episodes are so juxtaposed in all of their style and genre conventions and structuring, but still kind of convey just the fractal nature of one person's life, one clearly defined character or real person in this case, all of the things that a human being goes through in their life. Every aspect of the sound hits on both of these levels, that it feels awe-inspiring, and just how well produced it is, and how kind of glorious it is, and what it represents as her as an artist. And yet it feels so intimate. It feels like you're getting so close to who she is as a person. Just that duality, I think, is amazing. My recommended tracks are Gonna Love Me, one of I believe it's the second track, just the feeling of spilling into this wonderfully playful romantic space, this amazing Kanye-produced beat, but then also Rose in Harlem, a later track, which is just jaw-droppingly powerful and inspirational. I used to listen to it running almost exclusively. It just seemed to give me so much power. Just the dynamic changes in it, going into this massive chorus, and at the end, when they doubled down on the chorus, but they added a bunch of strings. That's like a Kanye production classic at this point, but oh my god, it hits so hard every single time. Okay. Next we have Last Waltz by World's End Girlfriend. A very strange but beautiful album cover of this orchid on fire. This is the latest full album project from the eccentric multi-instrumentalist composer World's End Girlfriend. I'm paranoid that it might be his last, given that it's called Last Waltz, which was famously the title of the band called The Band, their farewell concert and tour. So, I don't know. Since then, we've gotten some singles and some EPs from him, but nothing on this scale. It's a lot more restrained than some of his previous work, which is not saying a lot, because his previous work was explosively unrestrained at points. But it seems here that nothing is just weird, that there's this complex compositional urge that motivates absolutely everything, that nothing is done just for the sake of seeing if he can, but everything is done because he has a grander project in mind. Things are still like super weird though. You know, there's weirdness still, but it serves a greater purpose. And some of his most sophisticated compositions yet. From album to album, I really see himself growing as a composer, I think. It feels like an artist that's fully expert in all of these tools, most of which he has made himself over the years. Just the synths and instruments he's learned, and the way that he masters and mixes them, and all of those really uniquely glitchy things that just are such signatures of his style. The noisy elements now, not just, as I said, kind of explosive experiments that he throws in there for the sake of it, but tools in his arsenal that he knows to use to bring out bigger, more complex ideas. There's these sprawling centerpiece tracks. They move all through these modes with variations and repetitions on melodies and motifs. It's like a symphony. But then these are contrasted by little isolated looks at like a singular theme or a singular idea, kind of given a special spotlight. I think I really like the structuring. This is how I kind of described Benji as well, and the Aphex Twin album Zero. I didn't talk about it, but it's very much the same, and it's a kind of mixture of singular ideas and then big kind of symphonic compositions. So I think there's something about the structuring that really does it for me. The best part, though, is these moments of sheer, brilliant, crystalline beauty that seem to be forged from the chaos swirling around it, such that the complexity and the hidden order of these swirling, chaotic compositions is revealed in the reflections of these just kind of transcendent moments. But then it sinks back in, obliterated by waves of noise once more. Ooh, I love it. My recommended tracks, these are actually back-to-back tracks on the album, so I recommend hearing them back-to-back as well. In Silence, in Siren, which is a remix of a Teyana song, I believe, called In Siren. No, it's called In Silence, and the remix is In Silence, in Siren. So it's something that I think World and Girlfriend is really good about, really good at, where it's this really kind of beautiful, simple, sung song, just like a very kind of tender vocal performance, and then it is kind of exploded and explored through this noisy soundscape where all the same melodies and vocal samples are kind of juxtaposed and recontextualized. I just absolutely love this kind of composition. And then right after that is Radioactive Spell Wave, which at first sounds like this kind of poisoned, inverted, and distorted version of what you were just hearing. And I absolutely love the transition between the two. But then it explodes into one of these gigantic symphonies of noise and just the weirdest, most diverse music you can imagine. Actually, more than you can imagine. I challenge you to imagine this sort of thing without hearing it. So yeah, really cool music. Next, we're going to talk about Big Boy, Sir Lucius Leftfoot, the son of Chico Dusty. This is a long, long awaited debut by one half of the greatest rap duo of all time, that of course being Outkast. I will not hear any debate or suggestion of an alternative. Outkast is and always will be the greatest. And yeah, after they split up, Big Boy had been saying for years and years and years that he was going to start releasing solo albums. And finally, after like 5 or 6 years of this, we got it. And it's fantastic. As soon as you hear like 1 second of it, you'll understand how that time was spent. Just every aspect of the production is so rich, so deep, so perfectly catchy, so well crafted that it's almost incomprehensible. It's both so simple that it's catchy and yet so complex in the songwriting behind it that it's hard to even just kind of get your brain around what's actually happening. Luckily, you don't have to, though, because it's just some bangers. It's all bangers. It's over 1 hour of bangers of every type you can imagine. So don't worry about how it's happening. It's happening. It gets into modes of sentimentality, of the political, of the intimate, of inspirational territory. These really quite serious and profound areas of Big Boy's life, but it's still all bangers. Guests are given free rein. They fully express themselves as long as they're making bangers, and of course they do. And this works so well because, honestly, of every single rapper we're going to talk about on this list, and there's a lot of them, Big Boy is still a tier above. He's still in a tier of his very own in terms of sheer rapping power level. And that's what makes every single song on this album a banger. And yes, I'm even comparing here to Young Thug and Earl. Big Boy, still a tier above. My recommended tracks are Daddy Fat Sax, the opener. After the intro is the first like real song. It samples a previous Outkast hit, which I think is super cool, just kind of playing off their own legacy. And it's just it's a straight up banger. Like, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I keep saying banger, 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 you just listen to this and you're like, oh, I really want to play this music loudly in my car. And yeah, that's what makes it a banger. And Shine Blockers, which is like a different kind of mode, a little smoother, a little more kind of like late night banger, I guess, but definitely still a banger with a fantastic Gucci Mane feature. That if you're a Gucci Mane skeptic, if you don't really understand what made him so legendary, just check out how he raps on this and really try to picture anyone else being able to match the power of that flow. And Big Boy himself on it is fantastic too. Okay. Next we have this 2020 by Richard Dawson. Every time I see this album cover, I feel like I'm gonna like fall into it. It's like I feel close to being able to recognize what I'm seeing, and yet I cannot. So, okay, here's my question. We already talked about this at some length on the 2019 list, so we're gonna try to come up with new things to say about it. Here's my first question: is this actually set in the near future? Like, when it came out in 2019, was it supposed to be like set in 2020? Because I watched a Fantano review of it around when I was making these slides. I don't know, I just happened to see it on my recommendations, or maybe I saw it in the best of the decade list. I don't know. But he kept talking about it, like how it was set in the near future and how it was like an exaggeration of the current world or something. And I was like, I don't really get what you're talking about, because to me, the power of this album is that this is real life, that everything on here, as I said before, is like inevitably happening in some capacity, in some modified situation. The kind of substance of these stories are just true. This is just life. And yet, though, there's this sense that it's both life and a hint at something slightly beyond what is every day, what we can comprehend. There's this yearning, the black triangle that had been seen twice in the sky, knowing there's more, there must be. I don't know. It's kind of haunting when you start finding the pattern of all these kind of pointing to things that are just outside the scope of the album. So the question it seems to raise is existential dissatisfaction at the root of the human condition? Is it innately human to always think there must be more? Is this kind of the combined lesson of 2020 and Peasant, which was his previous album, which is the same kind of slices of life but set in the time of medieval peasantry? And both of them have the same yearning, the same angst and dissatisfaction. Or is it that it's not like an inherent part of the human condition, but more a systematic thing, that it connects the same confining systems for centuries, that we're still ruled over by the wealthy, we're still given a tremendous amount of responsibility, but a tremendous lack of agency in order to actually thrive, that we're still so creatively, personally, meaningfully unfulfilled because of this drudgery that we're always subject to. It kind of seems like that might be the lesson too. I don't know. The stories don't offer any kind of transcendental relief. There's no great insight that they all add up into that somehow makes it okay. But the music and the performance, this unleashing of the sheer emotional energy behind these stories and characters, it brings us to that kind of sublime state anyways, where it feels like we're seeing the long scope of things, that we're having at last the true perspective we need on life. And it leaves us with that sense of satisfying awe that we would want from some sort of magically comprehensive moral. There's this lingering feeling of ellipsis, that it's 2020, but the future is still to come. That even this futuristic sounding year and all the horrors of modern life depicted on these tracks, there's more. So my recommended tracks, again, I'll recommend different tracks than I did on the 2019 list, but check out Civil Servant, the opening track, which is about a poor civil servant that has to talk to people about why their disability benefits are being cut back or outright denied, and is just horribly depressed about the prospect of going in on another day. And Two Halves, which is a very endearing, relatable story about a kid playing soccer, his anxiety around how his father will think of his performance, that actually ends on a rare note of kind of compassion and positivity for this album. Well, of course, still being quite melancholy. Okay, next we have Elisa Crampton's American Drift. So this is, as we saw earlier, E+E. That was her previous alias. Now she's Elisa Crampton. And the bold experiments that she was kind of forging her own genre on that earlier release have now become a lot more confident. They feel almost revolutionary, deeply meaningful, and so resonant. There's even more complex and sophisticated sound collages, that same kind of style, the same sorts of origins of samples and stuff, but you can tell her compositional skills have leveled up since The Light You Gave Me to See You. And here, instead of alternating with these really kind of sparse, beautiful, but almost like ironic pop renditions, instead there's spoken word poetry from the poet Money Allah. And it's really hard to write the sort of poetry that they use. It's very imagery rich, it's very symbolic, and yet so cryptic. It calls back to like the Bible and other religious texts and kind of like universal mythology and things like that. It's really difficult to pull this sort of thing off sincerely without it sounding either too dense and kind of academic that it doesn't really resonate with you, or it's kind of too on the nose and feels sort of cheesy. But here they go for this like really powerful apocalyptic world being depicted in this poetry. And it both hits so deep and yet feels so tantalizingly incomplete that you want to dive into it more and research it and speculate. I think what makes it work so well isn't just the genius of the writing, but Elisa's work, the sheer sonic majesty of it, that it sounds so good, the backing tracks and stuff, so richly evocative, that you're put into a mindset where you're ready to believe in this, where you're ready to be caught up in the world that they're building. Feels like you're journeying through time via the sounds of America. That you hear the crickets, the ambient noises that were heard by the first peoples to set foot on this continent, building all the way through eras of radio and pop music, and near the end, on the final track, when they start sampling Lil Jon, that Lil Jon is put into the same kind of sonic context as crickets, say, this kind of iconified space. It's brilliant. It's such a cool idea, and it's like so true too, that our soundscape has evolved to the point where something like the Lil Jon Yeah is like there with us in the same way that the ambience of cicadas would have been to our ancestors. It feels like we're looking at the physical world through the primacy of sound over sight. Okay, let me try to explain this. So I talked a bit before, when we were talking about the Light You Gave Me to See You, that I had that really surreal experience where for just a few seconds at the start of the song, I felt like I was an animal again. That I was judging everything not based on what I knew it to be, but what it really was in the physical world. And for a while, I became quite fascinated by this idea that we live in the world of meaning. Okay? Like when we see written words, we don't just see like a bunch of squiggles printed onto something. We read the words, we know what it is. When I see this thing back here, it's not just like a gray soft lump. It's Pusheen. I know who Pusheen is. It's recognizable to me. Everything we encounter, we ascribe some sort of meaning to, and even more immediately than we can judge its like physical characteristics and its place in the world, we're judging its meaningful characteristics. We're coming up with stories of like why it's here, what significance can it hold, what use is it, what value does it have, how do I interact with it, how do I make it work. All of these things come to mind more quickly than like its sheer material properties, its size, its weight. Is it food? I don't know, the sort of things that an animal could judge. And this gap between the physical world and the world of meaning, where the world of meaning is like this veneer painted over the physical world. Things that explore that gap, that peel that away for just a second, are like super compelling and fascinating to me. And it feels like primarily we engage with the world of meaning through sight, but that once something is like an anonymous noise, once we just kind of like hear the sound of like you don't know what that was. You can make some guesses. Actually, probably a lot of you would guess that it's a spoon, and it is a spoon. But like, you don't know what this stuff is. There's no like meaning to it. And yet, for like an animal, for an early human, kind of surviving in the world, there's a lot of recognition, and there's a lot of like building up this physical space just through the sound. So it's like you take all of this stuff that has built up in the American soundscape, Lil Jon, radio commercials, whatever, and you strip away its meaning down to just like the physical sound and build up this soundscape around it. Okay, please. We gotta keep moving though. I could go on and on and on about this. I think that was under 5 minutes. I tried to give myself a 5-minute time limit to explain this concept because it's really fascinating to me, but it's really kind of difficult to explain. It's something that I'd like to go on about at some length at some other point, but whatever. My recommended tracks are the title track, which is one of the ones featuring Money Allah reading poetry. It's really beautiful, really moving, really haunting, really mysterious. It'll linger in your mind, some of the phrases, for hours and hours, I'm sure. And Axakan, the final track, where the soundscape has reached this kind of like modern era with Lil Jon and stuff, and the composition of this track I think is just brilliant, like the way sounds emerge and fade away, and the rhythms, and oh, it's just fantastic. Okay, moving right along to number 33, we have Death Grips, No Love Deep Web. So this is Death Grips at their most brutal, unforgiving, abrasive, noisy, chaotic, desolated, depraved, dangerous, and damaging. Everything from the cover, which, my apologies, this is a censored version of the cover. I did not want YouTube to ban me forever and ever by showing you a giant erect penis. This is a modification I made of it a long time ago for my display picture on Smashboards. I thought I would use it again. Anyways, yeah, the cover is pretty bold, and the release of the music was also quite bold. They were signed to like Interscope, I think, one of the really major record labels under which they released The Money Store. And I guess they had made this album, and the Interscope or whoever had some kind of far-thinking release strategy of like, you should probably not put out 2 albums in 1 year. Let's sit on it and wait, kind of see how this one does. And they're like, fuck that, we're just gonna release it right now. So they voided their contract. They were released from the record label because they had released this unauthorized album. With a big penis on the cover. But most importantly, the music itself has all of these elements too. Has that same spirit of you can't tell me what to do. Can't do me. And is this not what you want from Death Grips? Is this not the entire initial appeal of the band? Is this not what made them such a cult favorite to begin with? That sense of freedom, that sense of sometimes destructive freedom. There's jarring mixes of really intense maximalism and minimalism. On the maximal side, it's some of their most kind of fractal complexity. This side of the moon, that of course referring to Friends on the Moon, one of their later albums. But at other times, it's so sparse, so desolated. The sounds in such huge isolation. The sounds and developments shine, though, even though it's so noisy, even though it's so aggressive and confrontational. The ideas kind of behind it, the feeling of development through these songs, it's so beautiful. It's so brilliant. It's such genius composition that you still see it so bright. There's still kind of the frenzied nihilism that all of their music has, that's so engrossing, so compelling, you just kind of lose yourself in the world of MC Ride. But here, in quite a rare change, it's kind of desperate. It feels like they're not supremely powerful. They're not just the beast they worship, but that they're kind of at the edge. That this nihilistic, like totally gluttonous in some way. Like I really don't know how to put it into words, but that it's maybe unsustainable. That they're kind of scraping at something. It's so haunting. It's so haunting. The finale is totally unprecedented at this point in their career. It's restrained. It's kind of psychedelic and spaced out, hauntingly minimal. It feels like nothing else they had made to that point. A whole new world of sound that they had arrived in through this raging, through this insatiable appetite for noise and destruction and chaos, that they had found this new space. My favorite tracks on this one are Deep Web, quite a straightforward banger, really amazing kind of production behind it, some really crazy lyrics, just this insane sense of spiraling deeper and deeper into something. And No Love, which is, I think, kind of the iconic song on this album for me, just this extremely sparse the beat so isolated from anything, and then MC Ride coming in screaming as if the mic was like 30 feet away from him, but he still wanted to be as loud as possible. So good. Okay, moving along, at number 32 we have The Roots, How I Got Over. This is the complete opposite of the previous album. It's beautiful, affirming music. It's a friendly journey with close friends through the dark of your life and into the light. Each track feels smoother and more hypnotic, even more satisfying than the last. That every track you're like in awe of just how catchy and kind of, you know, uplifting the beat is, and then it just hits an even deeper groove on that same cut. And it just, when that radiant beauty becomes like almost unbearable, when you feel like they can't go any further in that direction, and you're almost like exhausted by being inspired, we're treated to just like a run of really super fun bangers, kind of showcasing a lot of guest artists and different styles and stuff. A really wonderful finale where you can just relax and enjoy the music and think about maybe the lessons that you learned on the previous tracks. There's this really free, collaborative spirit between all the people involved. There's so many guest features on this, so many people brought in to play and rap. It carries a really deep feeling of camaraderie that even though all of them are so free to express themselves and tell their personal stories and stuff, that almost incidentally, almost as if they hadn't planned it, so many themes resonate across them. So many ideas spark other ideas. And you realize that you have these collective experiences, that they've all been through the same sort of things together. It's beautiful. And I think no matter your religious feelings or lack thereof, we talked about this with Chance too, that sometimes you can still catch the feeling of God's great redemptive light, of really finding your way in the world because of this transcendental thing that is more beautiful, more big, more good than any other thing in the world. You know, that's not something I personally believe, but when I listen to this album, I can still feel it. And it's a nice feeling. And so, big bonus points for this. This album is actually what led me into being a Joanna Newsom superfan. So I was aware of Joanna Newsom when this album came out. I had listened to the Milk Eyed Mender and Yeez maybe a couple times each. I thought they were good, but I didn't really see what the fuss was about. I wasn't like super into her. But then my roommate started listening to this album. I don't remember why. He just got really into it. So we were listening to it a lot together. And there's a Joanna Newsom sample on Right On, which samples the book of Right On. And he was like, whoa, this is really great. I'm going to listen to, you know, this other artist too, the person they're sampling. So he got like super into Joanna Newsom because of that. And then because of that, because of him playing Joanna Newsom all the time, it finally clicked with me. I finally understood just how good she was. And, you know, the rest we'll see later in this list. So yeah, this album has a special place in my heart, because without it, I don't know if I ever would have fully appreciated how much I really love her music. So my recommended tracks are Radio Days. This is kind of in the first half of the album, where it's that successively more beautiful, more introspective music. I think this serves as a great introduction to the overall kind of style and flavor of the album. Lots of guest verses, lots of just kind of reminiscing together, telling your stories, a really catchy hook. Fantastic. And then Right On, which samples Joanna Newsom, I think, really expertly. And that sort of thing is kind of sacrilegious to me normally, so they have to do a good job or don't do it at all. But they do a great job here. And I think it's a really nice kind of storytelling, again, that mode of just sharing what your life is like and the lessons you've learned over top of a really unique beat because of this Joanna Newsom inclusion. Okay. For our final album in this segment, we're going to talk about Ellen Ark Bros for Organ and Brass. This is the exact opposite of every single other album on this list. It's all it is. It's literally all it is just big, sprawling chords that are played on a very old organ and the bass section of brass instruments. So like your tuba and euphonium, maybe just euphonium. I'm not actually sure what brass instruments they use, but all they do is just hit a chord. They go on for generally more than 30 seconds. Very, very rarely does it end after anything less than 10 seconds. Not all in sync. The organ will play a chord. And then the bass, the brass will go. And then halfway through that, the organ will go. And it's like that for about 45 minutes. And I do like a lot of like really weirdo ambient minimalist music for like a lot of really weird reasons. You know, I listen to stuff like My Cat is an Alien, which is just crazy ambient noise, electronica stuff. And you know, I'm into that stuff because it does do something really weird for me. It tickles some bizarre ASMR-y kind of feeling. But this is actually different. And I will admit, yeah, this is pretty weird. I'm not going to try to convince you this is like a normal album or something. I'd say it's like the musical equivalent of like a Bellatar film. A director who's famous for doing very, very long scenes. But it's like, how do I put this? Even though the way that Bellatar makes movies is quite experimental, the kind of emotional space he's aiming for, the sort of story he wants to convey to you, if not like the literal plot, which is also often quite weird, but the kind of like compellingness of it is still kind of traditional. if this makes sense. Like take the turn horse. Sorry, this is a big tangent about Bellatar, but whatever. Take the turn horse. Very, very slow movie. Very, very long shots. Very kind of confusing, minimal plot. But you wouldn't say that it's like surreal or anything. Like it's not overly, like it's not like weird for the sake of being weird. It's just that this sort of atypical structure is the best way to convey the actual things he wants you to resonate with. And I'd say it's the same thing with Ellen Ark Bros music, that it's not that she's trying to make experimental music. She's trying to convey an emotional space that might be actually kind of familiar to you. It's just that this is the way that she goes about doing it. This is hard to explain. Anyways, I'll just try to explain what my actual appreciation of it is, the kind of feeling it gives me. It's a lot more similar to how I appreciate classical music, actually, than anything else, where each chord feels so perfectly placed, so perfectly balanced with what has come before, how it perfectly anticipates it perfectly anticipates what will come next. That wasn't hard to say. Am I having a stroke? But you know, in classical music, like what it's praised for so much. I gotta take a break after this one. What it's praised for so much is the genius behind like all of the melodics and harmonics and stuff. If you look at someone like Bach, it's all about just this feeling of melodic transitions going from like note to note to note. How satisfying that feels, how brilliant it feels, how it's just right, like how it's like, yes, that was the note to choose. That sort of appreciation I get from hearing like a Bach fugue or something is what I get from this. It's just on a different scale. It's just stretched out. It removes all of the unnecessary ones instead of having like a little bum ba da dun 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 dun. It's like, okay, what's the actual important part of this? It goes dun dun. right? It like somehow distills it down into just the big ones that actually matter, and it gives me that same sort of satisfaction. It's those rare moments at the really climax moment of composition where there's some big chord change that just hits. It's like that, but just back to back to back to back. I don't know. It's really weird. Instead of like just this one chord, it feels like a continuous stream of that kind of tension, that anticipation, and then the response, the resolution, the chord that answers the question. It's like an idealized form of this kind of music. Does this make any sense? But the best part though is when it shifts not just from ba to ba, but when it goes from song to song. And even though it's the same instrumentation, so it really does just feel like they played a different note, there's such a shift in like, I don't know, somehow the tone of it. Maybe there's a key change. I don't actually know. But there's like a new urgency to it, a new dynamicism. Just from going from one nearly identical track to the next, it feels so powerful. Oh man, yeah, oh man, it's something special. Even though I don't know if I can express why. Not gonna recommend tracks for this one. It doesn't really seem appropriate. Just try listening to it. This is maybe kind of sacrilegious, but like if you're getting bored, just try listening to the last minute or so of the first track and then into the second track, so you can get like this big shift. Because I think that's really, really cool, and that's maybe the easiest part to like appreciate at first. And if you're still not feeling that, then just give up. But I think there's probably like 1% of viewers that will really vibe with this. It'll become kind of special to them, as it has been for me. Okay, that is all for this section. In the next one, we're going to go from 30 to 21. There's some bangers on there for sure. Here's a little preview. It's a crying baby! Oh no!